Hey everybody, my name is Aaron Shea and welcome to Habitat Now. It is a true honor to have you join me on this holiday weekend. Happy July 4th. Hope you all enjoyed the fireworks. I think they have all stopped by now, I hope. But I'm grateful to have you join me as we dive into NGG July. It's amazing. We're already in July in 2024 and celebrating this incredible event, and we're interviewing and discussing and talking with artist Draper Matthews today. So he's here to join us, but we'll get to him in one second. We'll go through a little housekeeping today on what's going on in the gallery, and I'm excited for you to join and share. We do these talks every week, so let's talk about that. So we do these talks every Saturday, and we share them on Facebook as well. But it's great if you can watch them live. If you're watching on YouTube, like, subscribe, hit that bell, get the word out, and we continue to do these every single Saturday throughout the year if possible. So please join us and share the news as we all celebrate and love glass. If you're looking for a link to this event and you don't get on our emails or you lost it, just go to the hamburger right here on our habitat.com page. Click it. You'll see a button that says Zoom. It's so easy. Just RSVP there. Looking forward to seeing you every single Saturday. For those of you who don't know, we have our 42nd MasterWorks auction up online. It just went up over the holiday weekend. It went up on July 4th. 105 pieces of artwork for sale. Please check it out. If you have any questions, call me. Want to bid on something, feel free to send me a message or bid live online on habitatauctions.com. The link is on top of our website, and we're 2 weeks away, so looking forward to it. Lots of great treasures available to the highest bidder from multiple collections. Come and see Glass 52. The international exhibition is up on display. Over 400 works, and they're all incredible. And sometimes artists stop by, but come and I'd love to show you around myself, or Corey can show you around. It's great to have you see this amazing space here in Royal Oak, Michigan. A couple other pictures. This green piece just got sold. We'll be sending it off this upcoming week. Alex Bernstein, congratulations to him. Lots of true treasures. So quickly going through that. If you're looking for a summer commission, this is the best time to do it. Think of your project. Think of an idea for Draper. We'd love to work with you on a project and have it ready by the fall so you can explore your space with any idea you have. This is a commission that just got finished. 4 masterpieces by John Littleton and Kate Vogel, all installed in the client's home. All 4 unique flowers from the Ikebana / series, and they are just stunning. Another thing to go through real quick is John Miller, longtime family member of Habitat Gallery, and we'll talk about him more in a second. He's releasing Zing soon, which is his next fast food offering in his limited series. So this isn't released just yet, but will release soon. A chicken wing. I'm sure you guys love these things. I know I do, but expect us to get more information about that soon. Now we're into NGG. So we're in July. We're in I think our 4th year of the show, I think, and it's quite an incredible experience. And John Miller actually recommended Draper, who's here today, to join us and talk. And this show, NGG, is a year-long exhibition and competition focused on artists who are working towards the future of art. And we do them around the first of every month. The closest Saturday to the first of every month, we do an artist in the series. So let me know your favorites. If you have artists you think that should be in next year's NGG, call me. But it's really putting an exciting pulse on the map for the future of the medium. So, Draper, it's great to have you, man. Thanks for being here today and joining me.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's an honor to get the invitation to be a part of this year's NGG exhibition. So,
That's
yeah.
great. We're going to learn more about you in a second. If you have any questions about the work, feel free to ask during the presentation. If you want a price list, feel free to ask during the presentation. And thank you for joining us today. I'm going to stop sharing and you can take over, Draper. And Draper was highly recommended by artist John Miller, who works with Draper because they're both in the same state. And Draper does a lot of work for other artists we'll learn more about probably during this presentation. And great to have you, Draper. Let's go. I'm looking forward to learning more about your life, career, and work.
Thank you, Aaron. So, hello, everybody. I'm Draper Matthews, artist, maker, technician, thinker, and spectator of experience. Like Aaron mentioned, I am from Normal, Illinois. I work with John Miller at Illinois State University. I did my undergraduate studies with John, and I'm actually his solo grad student at the moment. I'm going into my 2nd year as a MFA at Illinois State. So if you're not familiar with the scenery in Illinois, that's about what it looks like most of the year. Um,
Great.
not incredibly exciting, but beautiful at times. I go out to places like Pilchuck Glass School or to other glass programs around the country, and it always seems like everybody's so well traveled. Um, but I'm not well traveled at all. I kind of take pride in the fact that, I've lived in Normal, Illinois like my whole life. Born in Bloomington, Illinois, a couple of miles from Normal. And I've done all of my schooling in Normal, Illinois. Um, but because of that, I've, explored the world in different ways, typically through research. Um, this is my dog Pickle, by the way, just to give you a little insight to my life. Pickle's a big boy. We love Pickle. He's pretty goofy. This is my other dog, Mia. She doesn't mind being dressed up. Um, just to catch you up to date with me, I just came back actually from TAing for Melanie Hunter at Pilchuck Glass School. Me and Mel taught a class on glass casting together. And Melanie Hunter is a great artist in her own right, but she has also been the main studio technician for Nicholas Africano for the last 25 to 30 years. So I also now work with Nicholas. I'm doing some of his drawing and some of his mold making and preparing some of the wax positives for Melanie to cast into glass, as well as working with John Miller. So those are kind of the things that I'm doing in the periphery of my practice. Uh, this picture was taken right before we loaded up those molds into the kiln. Very exciting time for the class. That was about 4 days of buildup and really hard work from all of the students. So I actually, you'll get to maybe have a rare look at like the entire evolution of my artistic practice because it is actually very brief compared to a lot of artists that, get to show with Habitat and NGG. Um, so you'll get to see pretty much from start to finish, but really I started making art, what I would call art in, 2019, so 5 years ago now. Um, I was working at FedEx as a package handler. Um, I was starting my education because they offered a tuition reimbursement I wanted to take advantage of. I was actually in a business administrations major. And I found out very quickly that, I wasn't really jiving with that career choice that I had made. But I had to take an elective, a humanities course. So I took a drawing fundamentals course. And in drawing one, typically you work on observational drawing, so drawing things that you're looking at from life. Um, so this is one of those very first early drawings that I did of a still life. And what that course really gave me was the lens to look at the world in a different way and to really pay attention to what was around me and in front of me. Um, it's a project that I really enjoyed, water on stainless. So this is just a close-up image actually of water, a water droplet on a stainless steel water fountain. So just really diving into the minutia of that water droplet. This is another image that I made. This is called My Mind at Rest. This is an image that is kind of like a stream of consciousness drawing. So I set up a page and I set up a bunch of drawing utensils and I just start sketching out things that I'm thinking about. So there's all kinds of weirdness. I was listening to different kinds of music. I was watching documentaries. I believe something about video games. There's some Pac-Man stuff in there. So really just this hogwash of thought and experience. This is another image just sent to the muses. So this image is really me trying to capture illustratively, how it feels to be a creative and how it feels to be a thinking person and, where thoughts come from. Because I don't know about everybody else, but for me, it seems like, I have no ideas and then all of a sudden ideas just pop into my head. And I find that process very interesting. So this drawing kind of marks a change in my thought about, the things that I was trying to speak about in my work. So I was very interested in perception and experience, but I had never looked at it through like a scientific lens. So this drawing of a glass Erlenmeyer flask actually predates any glasswork I did, which I find just a fun little tidbit. Um, but this large scale charcoal drawing is me kind of introducing that scientific research into my process. It's another observational drawing. So when I got to Illinois State University, I finished my associate's degree in community college and moved on to my bachelor's, my BFA actually. I got into printmaking because I wanted to do more with the images that I was creating rather than just, having the one single image. I wanted to be able to play with that imagery more, so I started making prints. So this is actually a print that was inspired by my experiences with doing mindfulness meditation practices, which can be a very disorienting at first. It can kind of separate you from the physical body. This is interpreting the ether, and this is a print, pretty small scale copper plate actually, but this is me trying to like make sense of what it is to be a human being that's taking in information and then getting an experience, a phenomenal experience back. And here's another variation of that. This is a forms of perception. This is a relief block print that I made. And this is really just kind of thinking about, once again, like this scientific, logical, uh, reasonable view of perception and how we, have cones within our eyes and then how the eyes kind of filter us back like this never-ending flow of experience. So up until this point, I've been working very representationally in all of my images. Um, and this kind of marks a turning point here where I started experimenting with a painterly practice in monotype on a lithography press, and I started working more abstractly and non-representationally. So these are just several examples of that experimental period. I've always been very um, concerned with the structure of things and actually deconstructing those structures to try and understand them better. It's something that actually pops up a lot in my process, especially because I like to get actual physical models of the things when I move into sculpture, physical models of the things and actually take them apart and tinker with them. So these are several different cellular structure images that I made. I've always been really heavily influenced by MC Escher, if you're all familiar with MC Escher, in the way that he used pattern and perspective to really like play with the idea of perception and the human experience. So these are some of my first lithographs. So this is a large scale collage actually of several smaller lithographs. So this is one of the advantages that I found working in print was being able to make multiples, which sidelined really nicely into my interest in pattern making. And just for a little context, this is actually my drafting studio, or I consider this my drawing studio. This is where I come to read, on the board over there, that large mirror is actually my drawing surface or my easel. I actually will stand there and play putt-putt and kind of philosophize and write down my thoughts, and then revisit them later and black things out. And, I'm hoping eventually someday I'll be able to write a text about those. So moving into glass, in 2021, I actually took Glass 1 with John Miller, which is just an introduction, like a survey course to glass. And up to this point, you've only seen two-dimensional work because I only had worked two-dimensionally until 2021. Um, I only took glass actually because I didn't have the time to fit a ceramics course into my schedule. And I quite honestly had no idea about what hot glass sculpting or glass blowing or flame working or any of that was when I signed up for the glass course. I really was convinced that I'd be doing things like stained glass or kiln fusing. And we did absolutely none of that. If anybody knows John Miller's work, he is very much furnace, hot sculpting and glass blowing based artist. But these are paperweights that I actually made. I mean, this was the extent of my technical ability at the end of that first semester. And, these paperweights, conceptually for me, I really liked the fact that, they could be sand carved and they could be like these little windows, opening up to another world that's kind of hidden away or obscured. And I actually used these to change my major to glass because I very quickly found that I definitely wanted to do more with glass and be more involved in that movement, which is very, I see it as being very cutting edge and avant-garde and quite new still, as far as the grand scheme of, art history goes. And in particular, I'm kind of edging towards um, flame working or torch work because I think that is kind of like there's a lot of really exciting things and technical advances happening within flame working right now. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. This is one of my first projects I was ever assigned by John. He wanted us to make a glass structure out of pulled glass cane. So I actually pulled all this clear glass cane and I painted it in fluorescent paints. Um, it's quite an interesting assignment. It really opened me up to different possibilities and ways to use glass. That's actually me sitting in it. The people in the studio termed they named it for me. They called it Hippie Jail, and to this day that is the name of the piece is Hippie Jail. So this is my studio space that I've been graciously given um, at the Glass House at Normal at University, Illinois State University, sorry. But this is where I do all my glass-centered work, my cold working, this is where I store all my glass powders and things, some of my pieces. And this is also a really important place because this is where, parts and components hang out. And, I also, as a graduate student, especially, I teach. So I teach introduction glass blowing, and that's become a really big part of like my practice, is actually interacting with students and helping them develop their ideas. It's been really beneficial for me um, in developing my own work. But I come to this place 6 days a week, especially during the school year. Um, and, I pass by those parts and components every day. And very often I'll make things and I don't really know why I've made them. But as long as they hang around, like eventually, I get one of those light bulb moments where I find how I'm going to use that or what that's really for. So that's kind of how this place functions for me as well as, just an office. That's my studio mate, Clarence. So Clarence does all my cold working. He hangs out on my bookshelf. So when you start glass blowing, very typically what people are taught is, how to make cups and how to make vessels. And traditionally that is, when we go back, 100 years or beyond, that's really what furnace glass work was all about was, making vessels, making goblets. Um, so, that's where my education began, and that's when I began exploring the material was that and actually solid paperweights because they don't take any technical ability as far as being able to blow a bubble in the glass and keep track of that. So these are I was at this time caught in a conflict of seeing a lot of sculptural work. I was becoming familiar with the contemporary glass movement and I was wanting to work sculpturally, but I really just had trouble imagining the material being used in that fashion. And that's when, working with John and artists like that have really expanded my view on the material. But these are those early vessels where you can actually see I'm trying to transpose my imagery or my image making ability onto the surface of the glass. So this is a series that I actually made. These are a couple of them. Where I made cameo blanks and then I sand carved in from rendered and cut imagery, these birds, because I've always been really fascinated by birds, and I actually had an experience um, where I saw birds flying through the sky, and I was actually catching the beating of their wings in frames, and it seemed like they were, breaking apart. So I drew up some birds, and I actually cut up the images and started to pull them apart, and then I added that to the glass. This would probably be one of my first, what I would call really a sculptural piece. This is a vessel that I made, and this kind of informs an aesthetic that you'll see going forward. This, rusty, broken, worn down aesthetic. So at this time, I was actually in my, last semester of my undergraduate um, career before I was going to start considering applying for, graduate school. And the barrier to, and this is something I'm actually also passionate about, is kind of like making glass more accessible. But the barrier to entry for especially like furnace work is quite high, and there's very limited facilities that can actually accommodate you for a reasonable price or a reasonable trade-off to be able to make your own work. So I wanted to be admitted into a program as a glass sculptor to be able to continue working in glass and, exploring the medium. So I really kind of just decided to jump off a diving board and go and make some crazy surrealist inspired sculpture and really push myself to even if it wasn't all glass and it was mixed media, but to use the glass to accentuate, the other media that I was using. So this piece is one of those pieces I made for my MFA application portfolio. And this is what I call it, my reality machine. Um, so this is just, I'm trying to capture what it would look like, the messiness that we find in experience in being a being situated in a specific reality, and how that's kind of just always falling apart. You when you read about it, it seems like this very neat and tidy phenomenon, but we all know that life is messy. So there's other angles of this. So this piece would include, this is plaster, there's some foam in there. I actually made molds for the gears and the bolts and things. They're, glued on. There's sculptural wax used here. There's plate glass that's been cut, ground, and polished. So that's what comprises this piece. And there's just a close-up of the details there of the sculpt. The honeycomb elements are cardboard. This is a piece I was very happy with. This is 3-1, and 3-1 is a hot sculpted glass piece. What I was trying to do in this piece is I was trying to capture, the basic physics of that make up a spatial temporal dimension. So 3-1 alludes to a three-dimensional space and then one temporal dimension. And I was trying to capture that all within the glass, because I found that glass actually has this magical ability over a lot of other materials to have movement, but also to capture point and line and form and plane. And I wanted to accomplish that in this piece. So you can actually,
What?
so you can actually see the flamed work drop there is capturing the one temporal dimension. The filigrana cane that are weaving through the bottom two layers of the piece, those are capturing the single points in perspective. And then you can see from another angle there, they also imply line. And then the single planes, the layers in between, are actually glass powders that capture those two-dimensional shapes or two-dimensional planes you see in geometry. And then, of course, the overall form is the three-dimensional form. And that's actually the test piece that I made for that. So what I would do is I took I set up a graphite mold, and I would ladle in glass clear, and then I would sprinkle on powdered glass, and then I would have somebody back up and bring another ladle of clear glass to encase that, and then I would cold work these into cubes. So what I end up with is you end up with this very thin band of color within the piece that actually at viewing height, it disappears nearly. So this is beginning here is work that I was making for my BFA thesis exhibition, so my exit for my undergraduate career. Um, and I was wanting, I read this really interesting book. It was The Case Against Reality by Donald Hoffman, who is a professor at UC Santa Cruz. And Donald Hoffman actually, his specific line of research is in the visual experience in philosophy. And he gives an evolutionary argument that argues against our perception of reality, and actually that perception should become less and less true over time because it's evolutionary advantageous to take in that less information but get the same results. Um, but I read that and I thought that that was a little unhinging, actually, that I'm not seeing things as they are. So I started making these bolts. And once again, I really didn't know why I was making the bolts. They sat in the studio for a while, but then I realized like I was making them because, my nuts and bolts of what was holding me and tethering me to reality, with that research was they were kind of becoming unhinged and distorted. And I was becoming very suspicious of them. So I began making the Unfastened series of works. So these bolts, these are blown glass pieces that have been popped open or cut or filleted. And, they've been put into these apocalyptic, almost narrative scenes using different construction materials because, I mean, what I was talking about was constructs themselves, visual constructs. So we're using like concrete, we're using copper nails, we're using foam and metal paints and real patinas is another angle of that piece, and then some basic mold making applications and processes. Um, so a big part of these actually is when they were displayed in the gallery, in the labeling information, I would lie intentionally about the materials that were used. So glass would become plastic or rubber, concrete would become plaster, rebar ties would become like, um, just wire or filament. So this was labeled as broken shards of glass, and I would sprinkle this all over the pedestal and around the gallery, but it's actually crumbled silicone rubber that's used actually a lot in like beer commercials because you don't as a substitute for ice because you don't want the ice to melt during the commercial shoot. So it was interesting to see like people walk around and avoid it or shun their children for trying to touch it or be appalled by it because, they thought it was one thing, but it was actually harmless. This was actually the final piece in the Unfastened series. This one was juried in and auctioned off at Pilchuck's annual auction and gala last year. Uh, Unfastened 2, I introduced this play with scale, where I started introducing actually mini construction materials. So there's actually miniature bricks and 2x4s and tiny little finishing nails in the 2x4s. And the black expanding foam is labeled as tar when it's displayed. So I ended up having a lot of extra, bolts that never made themselves into those narratives. So I just started to play with them sculpturally. So in this piece, I made a steel structure welding um, pieces of steel together to actually hold these metallic bolts that I blew on the pipe. And actually, in the gallery, this structure stands and the bolts have these lenses that are ground into the top of them. So you can actually look through the lens. And depending on which angle you look at, they face pieces in the gallery, other pieces, and they actually expand or shrink your perception of those pieces. This is another piece that I made with the bolts. I label it as missing parts. These are, parts that I didn't see them finding a place on their own in a narrative. So I put them together, but then I actually decided to add these hot sculpted nails. And at the time, we had this beautiful tank of cobalt glass we were melting. There's the mold that all of the bolts were blown out of. I really worked it to death. It did a great job. There was a book I was actually reading right after Donald Hoffman's introduction to his theory. Um, and it was Paper Folding for Designers by Paul Jackson. And it was actually a really interesting book about, how to do like fashion pleating with fabrics and things to get interesting patterns. Um, but it actually used paper as the modeling material to do that. And they actually ended up, the paper models that I was making going through the book ended up having a lot of sculptural character, and they caught shadows very beautifully. And I wanted to replicate that in glass, but I actually decided that I didn't want to make them out of, traditional sheet glass because I didn't want them to be clear. I actually wanted them to be paintable and drillable. So that actually is my first time using fiberglass, which is an incredible material that's worked as a composite where you use the fiberglass along with like an epoxy resin to stiffen it. But what you end up with is, you end up with essentially like a car bumper part, would be something that is made out of fiberglass where it's very light and it's very sturdy because of the glass weave, but you're able to drill into it easily. It handles heat very nicely and it's very cost effective. So I was able to, get the thinness I wanted of the paper models, but also be able to use mixed media in the way that I really wanted to. And then the mini cinder blocks are just a play on scale. So this is an example of a more intricate pattern. So all of these are actually molded from watercolor paper. I would take the watercolor paper, I would fold it into the pattern that I wanted, and then I would harden it with like a shellac. And then from that hardened paper model, I could make a rubber mold. And from the rubber mold, I could then drape the fiberglass into the mold and then resin it. So within the series of planar construct, I'm exploring the way that, two-dimensional planes can be broken and bent and deformed to make three-dimensional forms. And that's the whole idea with exploring that concept in this body of work. But as the work developed, the series, um, things began to get more and more organic. So I would start to take the resin fibers and I would twist them together and I would hang them from the ceiling. And then after they're stiffened, I'm able to just, they're able to be oriented in any fashion that I'd like.
How long does it take to get that specific style you want? Do you have to have them like positioned and held by apparatuses, or does it stiffen in your hands?
So it actually really it depends on the resin you use and how
Mhm.
long it takes to harden. For example, this one, if you can imagine it flipped 180 degrees
Mhm.
backwards. This was twisted and then clothespined, and then the clothespin was tied up to the ceiling, and
Mhm.
then it was left overnight, and that's how you get that twist.
Ah, gotcha. Good to know.
So this one, for example, this is the largest one that I made. And this one was the only one that I didn't paint because I loved, even though it's fiberglass and not glass sheet, it actually captures light beautifully and it shimmers. Like I was absolutely surprised by this. But it has a very glassy light quality to it. But this one was propped up by broom handles and left overnight. But when it's in that state, and then these are actually metal, the metal is epoxy clays that are sculpted and then left onto the fabric as it hardens. And then so you're able to get these like drooping, metal effects wherever I wanted to place them, almost like it was patchwork together. But once they're hardened, you can orientate them. I don't have a picture of it, unfortunately, but I really love how this one looks when it's hanging from the ceiling. So I call I only have one of these in the slide presentation, but I made a series of what I would call my planar evolutions. So the planar evolutions were a body of work where I would take the fiberglass models that I just showed, and then I would actually take them a step further and we would push them into a sandbox in the hot shop, and we would ladle hot glass and sand cast them. Sand casting actually typically produces a flat form, but you can see that this form here actually has a bend in it. And that's because when it was molten, I was suited in like an astronaut outfit pretty much. And then I would get down in the sand pit with Kevlar gloves and I'd actually pick them up and twist them and bend them. Um, and
Hmm.
this, yeah, I forget the artist, unfortunately, but there's a female artist that actually does a similar technique, but in the kiln. Um, but this piece here was ladled with the cobalt blue glass that we were melting. Um, and I just thought it was a wonderful opportunity to make use of that hot color, as we would call it. And that's how it looks displayed and lit. I really love the double image of the mirror. So this is my first time going out to Pilchuck. I took a workshop with Unsa Choi, so I was there as a student this time. Um, and that's me after the TA party. And then I came back from Pilchuck and what Unsa really did was introduce me to using, a torch to flame work. And in particular, she showed her networking method, if you're at all familiar with Unsa's work. And I came back, and actually during that trip, somebody that was really close to me had a psychotic break. So, that was a difficult episode, but I was really interested with the conversations that I had with that person and how, we were able to communicate, but we were almost living in two different realities. We were able to have cordial conversation, but they would go off sometimes on tangents about how they were hearing voices
Hmm.
and seeing things and having hallucinations. And I just really thought that that concept was really interesting, of like things being lost in transmission. um so I started going out and photographing my surroundings in electrical infrastructure and telecommunications infrastructure. And this is one of the drawings that I did as a study, actually, of the forms that I was going around and photographing. So this is me kind of elevating a transformer in a Duchampian fashion through drawing. And that is the drawing in process. So this is another one of those drawings, but here I have actually transposed the drawing on top of a bank ballpoint ink drawing, where we have this tension of two different spaces trying to coexist. And this is a close-up of a coaxial cable you might find on like a power line. It all really coalesced back into this installation that I made, where I made a large triptych, and then I made these two tower-inspired forms, using, borosilicate glass flamed worked on the torch. Um, and then, the sculptures in the drawing, they interact together to make a three-dimensional space of this exchanging of information. That's a drawing a student did of me flame working, this tower in particular. Here's a close-up of the glass separated from the drawing. And then the other piece. This is actually interesting because this is a piece that's in progress. I don't quite know what it is yet, but I'm working on it. I'm really fascinated at the moment by this idea of flow, or this, going through of life and experience and capturing a moment, a phenomenal experience. And then actually, I've been reading a lot about phenomenology as a philosophical discipline, and the experience of experience, and really diving into that. What does it mean to be a person that's having experience? Less so, how do you have it, but how does that happen, or how does that come across as a person in a body? This is a recent collaboration I did with Holly Khalil, who's a Chicago-based textile artist and sculptor. Um, Holly came to Illinois State University and did a workshop on how to naturally dye fabrics. And I found it as an opportunity to explore the craft, really the craft-oriented tradition inside of glass and glass blowing. So I made a large scale goblet that incorporated my use of mixed media, but also the fabric that I made in that workshop. And it's kind of a representation of a meditative moment, or a meditative experience of shearing and tearing the silk and linen. This is the last installation piece that I made. So this study in phenomenology and that philosophy and existentialism actually has really brought to light, how the mind is shaped and how we become the people we are. And I'm looking into how memory actually facilitates that, or plays a big part in that shaping. So this piece is actually derived from a writing or a diary practice or a free writing practice. It's kind of a combination of all those things. Um, where, I was thinking about objects in my bathroom in particular, and I was thinking about, the little aspects that kind of grab my attention on a daily basis, that are typically, a flyby, and I don't think about them a lot, but they do command attention for one reason or another, and actually giving them their moment in the writing and delving into those objects. It, um, so the stacked stones are actually these tiny little, they're only really an inch big in reality. My partner keeps a couple of these little stones in the shower. It's a decorative element, but I'm constantly rearranging them as I get in and out of the shower on how they're situated on the tile in the shower. And sometimes, I put them in there each little squares, or sometimes I put them on the cross sections of the grout. Oftentimes, many times actually, I've frustratingly tried to stack the two rocks together, and they're just really not shaped to stack. So really the black stacks are in a way me like manifesting this little desire I have to have those things like kind of coexist together, um, and stack up really nicely.
You,
And
you
then
need to add your own stack in there.
right. Um, and then through the writing exercise of writing about the bathroom and writing about the rocks, um, the pebbles in the shower kind of took me to this memory of being in my grandfather's basement. And my grandfather was a paraplegic, and he spent a lot of time, because he had a hard time getting out of the house on his own. He spent a lot of time online. He got very much into online shopping, in eBay, and he started to just collect these seemingly like random, objects, but in mass. And one of those objects that he started collecting were these obsidian chunks, so volcanic glass. And he would keep them downstairs. It was for him, I think it was more about the experience of buying really than having them. So he would keep them in the basement where he didn't have ready access and they were out of sight. But they lived under a ping pong table that me and my grandmother would play ping pong at. Um, and they would exist in this little box. Um, but they were always obscured by the ping pong table as well because, it was covered and you wouldn't really notice they were there until you started investigating under. So, that's why the shower curtain's there is because, it's that obscuring element. And then the box, the stones in the bathroom tile, they all kind of come together to make this space and place and time that are all like transposed together within my own memory, which I find very interesting. What I really love about the piece, though, are the glass stacks of rocks. So I did photograph them separately. And I just wanted to show those because I think they're just beautiful forms on their own. And this is to all the pieces I forgot to photograph because, as making goes. And that's how you can get a hold of me, and that's my website. Feel free to contact me. The website does have a contact form. And thank you, everybody, for listening.
Thank you,
Okay.
Draper. Go ahead and stop sharing your screen. It's an honor to have you participate in NGG this year. I'll show everybody your website real quick. I have it up on my robot here to show your NGG presentation. You're welcome to come to Draper's site and scroll down and see the works we talked about during this exhibition and some of his thoughts written here, which is great to have. And then if you'd like to learn more about NGG, notgrammarsglass.com is here. You can scroll down and see everybody who's participated so far in this year. And as you can see, we're already in the 7th month, which is exciting. And this exhibition will continue into the future. So thank you again for joining us today. Thank you again, Draper. Honored to have you. And like I said in the text, if you have any questions, you want to look at a price list of available work, feel free to contact me, Aaron at Habatat, and we'll talk soon. Have a great holiday weekend, everybody. And thank you again, Draper, and we'll see you hopefully soon.